Okay, looks like it's already 1 o'clock, past 1 o'clock, so time to get going. Sorry for the late start there. I thought I was organized, but I was not. So back to topic 11 today. I'm not sure if we will start topic 12 or not. It kind of just depends. There's not as much to cover here today, but when it comes to Lyme disease, I tend to be a little long-winded, so we'll kind of we'll see where we get here today. So if you remember last day, we we're kind of finishing off talking about disease transmission, and the last part of that was vector-borne diseases. And so we showed you this slide of a bunch of different arthropod vectors. And so you've got some things with 6 legs, some things with 8 legs. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of the Canadian aspect, which is Lyme disease and West Nile virus. And I had showed you this slide as well, of course, has many different vector-borne diseases. Some that we've talked about already. We talked a little bit about malaria, African sleeping sickness, Chagas disease. There's a few others out there. You can see there are some that are spread by flies, right? So river blindness is something that is not applicable to Canada, but is in some parts of the world and spread by different types of black flies, for example. So these are really important, and often there's kind of 2 variables that are part of the formula. One is having the vector, right? So, for example, African sleeping sickness, those flies are found on one continent, right? So having the vector and also having the pathogen. So sometimes you can have the vector, but not the pathogen. So malaria is a good example where some parts of Canada, some of the warmer parts of Ontario and then the East Coast actually have the Anopheles mosquito, but the pathogen isn't there. Malaria used to be endemic to many parts of the southern United States, by the way. So Georgia, for example, is a warmer area of the states, and that's where the Center for Disease Control is. And that's why it was founded, because of malaria. But it's not really transmitted in the US anymore. And kind of the big thing was, believe it or not, screen windows. Right. So once that was invented, you don't have mosquitoes necessarily going into houses so easily anymore. It was never really like, if you look at parts of sub-Saharan Africa, the number of cases are just astronomical. In that case, it was, mosquito control was able to actually just eliminate the pathogen entirely. And it's not found in the animals, right? So there's no natural reservoir for the malarial parasites. The ones that infect humans are human only. There's one exception that infects monkeys that can infect humans, but then there you go. You have to have the reservoir, you have to have the monkeys, right? So let's talk about Lyme disease. I told you I might mention this one once or twice, this Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but the number of cases is very small. I think it's in the textbook somewhere, I can't remember, but we're going to focus on Lyme disease and West Nile virus, which are the big 2 vector-borne diseases in Canada. There's a handful of others that are spread by ticks, but like 1-2 cases a year, if that. You can look them up if you like, but these are the 2 that are worth focusing on. So I think this was one of the last slides I was showing you. We have the black-legged ticks. There's 2 versions, and I'll show you some maps here in a minute in terms of where they're distributed. But they can be anywhere in Canada, by the way. So one little thing about mosquitoes is mosquitoes have preferences. They, believe it or not, they like brunettes more than blondes. There are actual studies showing this. They think it might have something to do with the color, right? So when there's a contrast, so if you have dark hair and light skin, there's something about them seeing that. But apparently they do like brighter colors, and they do like the smells of certain people more. And they're also, in many cases, very species specific, right? There are mosquitoes that prefer to bite humans and some will not. Some, they have to if there's nothing around. We'll get to that with West Nile. But ticks are not picky. You got blood, they will bite you. Bird, animal, whatever. And notice I said bird. So these things can bite birds, and birds can fly anywhere. And so a few years ago, they found a couple of these ticks in Yellowknife, and everyone was freaking out, but probably just carried out a bird or a dog or something like that, right? So I think I pointed out that this nymph thing was the part of the life cycle that we're most concerned about, and it's very tiny. And I think I left you off with this wonderful image of these muffins that and the little ticks. So this is the bad news. These things are very small. If I had one on my body somewhere, I probably would not notice, I'm guessing, right? So that's the unfortunate part. But there's some good news, and we'll get to that in a minute. This is the life cycle. Not going to get into all the details of it. It's actually really fascinating. If you look at this life cycle, you can see it's involving small mammals. So for Lyme disease, you're looking at the white-footed mouse is the natural reservoir for the bacterium. And so these mice, they live in warmer parts of Canada. So not here, which is good for us. And they can harbor it in their blood, and they do not get ill, or we don't think they get ill. At least that's what the data shows so far. And so you can see, if you look at the tick life cycle, there's eggs, they hatch, you got the larva feeds off the mouse and gets the bacterium. And then it, grows up a little bit and becomes, there we go, the nymph, right? So here's the weird thing, just a kind of little side note, notice 6 legs, 8 legs, right? So they actually do that, right? They go from 6 legs to 8 legs when they become the nymph. So this is the thing, like I said, this is what we're concerned about, because now it has the bacterium in it, right? If you happen to be near the eggs and you get the larva, there's no bacteria in the gut. So not a big deal, even smaller though. And so this is the stage we're most concerned about. Eventually they want to mature to adults, and they might bite something else. So they're often associated with deer, because the deer and the mice often occupy the same ecological habitats, and so they're kind of in the same place. But again, the ticks don't care. Just generally when they're small, they're found on the ground. So smaller mammals are more likely to kind of be the thing. As they get bigger, they're like coming up grass, and they kind of they don't jump, by the way. Some people think they jump. They actually sit on the grass, and they just have their little claw out like this. And that actually has a name with tick people. It's called questing. So they'll just sit on the grass, and if you brush by, they've got these little, hooks on their little claws, and they can grab onto your clothes or whatever, right? So if you've ever seen like deer, like dog ticks or bear ticks or moose ticks, they're a lot larger, and you might see them around June on grass, right? Sort of early summer seasons, and they're doing the same thing, right? But yeah, so this is the stage we're most concerned about. At this stage, if they bit a deer, they're not, like, they're done. They're going to mate and die. That's what they do at this stage. So if you get one off of a deer, it's probably not going to bite you, right? So this is the stage we're most concerned about, unfortunately. But that's kind of what they do, right? So let's talk a little bit about the bacteria here. It's Borrelia. Borrelia, I mean. Burgdorferi. I always have a hard time saying that one. Named after a guy, right? Who is studying these things. So there's spirochetes, which is similar to the organism that causes syphilis. And the thing about spirochetes to know is they're very good at infecting tissues, and they can burrow and penetrate other tissues. So long-term infections can be really bad, if it gets into your heart or something, some sort of crucial system. But let's talk about a little bit about some of the early symptoms and the most common symptoms of Lyme disease. They bite, and they about 80% of people get this bullseye rash. I've seen some numbers about as high as 85%. Numbers probably actually lower, because there's probably a number of people out there that have been infected and didn't know it and didn't get the rash, right? So the actual numbers, I'm guessing, more like 50%. But a lot of people get this bullseye rash. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily where you got bitten. The rashes tend to often be around lymph nodes. So sometimes, here behind the knee, sometimes here kind of in the armpit area. So not necessarily where you're bitten. And this is a very, very distinct looking rash. And if you have this rash, like you have Lyme disease, right? There's like one other disease on the planet that causes this kind of rash, and it's actually a tick-borne disease, but it's not found in Canada. I think it's in South America or something like that. So if you have the rash, go get antibiotics. you want to get treated. A lot of these other symptoms you can see are kind of generic kind of symptoms, fever, fatigue. Sometimes people end up with, little pains in the joints and things like that. Tends to not be initially, but maybe a couple of weeks into infection and those kind of things, right? Unfortunately, these things are all hard to diagnose. And so if you don't have the rash, this can be a big problem with Lyme disease getting it diagnosed. We're getting better. My aunt had Lyme disease in 2016 or something like that. And she actually had the rash, believe it or not. But she had like physicians saying, well, we don't have it around here. And so she got turned away, right, for treatment. And she's like, well, I can use the internet and I can see this picture. So she found someone, and it's been acknowledged since that the ticks are actually in the area where she lives now in Northern Ontario. But you do want to get treatment, because the longer term stuff is not so pleasant. So if you have a reason to think that you've been exposed, let's say you went on a camping trip in the Ottawa area or Montana, and maybe somebody you were with got Lyme disease, right? And now you're ending up with some of these symptoms, right? That's important information to mention. That actually happened to a friend of mine. I don't know where he went, somewhere in the States, and his buddy, his hiking partner, got ill with Lyme disease. So he got prescribed antibiotics just in case in that particular situation. I don't know if he had any symptoms.
How do you compare like a primary host with a primary reservoir? Are they interchangeable words?
Yeah.
Like, would the mouse be the primary host and then the tick be the intermediate?
I would probably say that. Yeah. The reservoir, like I said, is kind of the natural place where it lives and may or may not cause illness, right? Kind of depending on, like in this case, the mice don't seem to get sick, right? Yeah. And they're the reservoir for sure. And then everything else, the deer and us and dogs, and we're all, I guess I don't know if I'd even say the word intermediate, because we're not essential for the life cycle of the tick. We're more accidental, maybe. You might use the word accidental host. Yeah. Later symptoms, right? So you've got a couple of things going on. Sometimes the tick is getting to other tissues, which can cause some serious issues. So some of these things like the heart palpitations and pain in the joints and things like that. And some of these symptoms, we're still kind of early in the stages of understanding what is going on, but we think some of this is immune stuff, right? So the immune system, you've got these bacteria that are in your body is killing them, but you've still got, endotoxins, and you've still got, little pieces of the bacteria in your system, and your immune system is causing issues, right? If you go on the internet, you'll see a lot of places are calling something chronic Lyme disease, and that is not accurate. Whether you get treated or not, the bacterium does eventually, at least our best understanding, maybe someday someone will have some new information, but our understanding is that the immune system will clear the bacteria, within a few weeks. But there are some people that have symptoms for up to 2 to 3 years. And so we think some of that is autoimmune stuff, but we're not really fully sure. I think I mentioned before, if you're a Canadian celebrity and musician who has had massive international success, then you should be concerned, because Justin Bieber, Avril Lavigne, and Shania Twain all were very ill, and all of them took, I think Shania Twain took like 6 years off of her career. Justin Bieber, a couple of years. Can't think of her name. Avril Lavigne, like a couple of years of just chronic fatigue, arthritis-like symptoms, not wanting to get out of bed. And you can see there's tons of interviews with these celebrities on the internet trying to, educate people a little bit about this kind of thing. I think in all 3 cases, it took quite some time before they were eventually diagnosed as well. I'll just say something about this. This is one problem with healthcare in general. There are countless numbers of people that go and they've got chronic fatigue and aches and all sorts of other vague symptoms, right? And nobody wants to deal with these people. We don't know what they have. Half the time, you can never figure out what they have. Do they have fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme disease? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And in many cases, there's not really much you can do with these people other than say, go eat well and get some exercise and maybe you'll get better, right? It's kind of, and it's frustrating from the healthcare perspective, it's frustrating from the patient perspective. And this is a big deal. And hopefully maybe someday we can do a little better with these things. So I couldn't find a good map, so I made one. This is where you're going to find Lyme disease being spread in most places in Canada, right? So the hot spots are Ottawa area, certain parts of Nova Scotia. Those are the real hot spots. Kind of, right into here. These are the hot spots. It used to be said that they would test the ticks and maybe a quarter of the ticks would actually have the bacteria in them. In Ottawa now, they don't even test them anymore because it's close to 100%. This is different than it used to be. 10 years ago, it was almost exclusively this. So notice what's happening, right? We're starting to get into Manitoba, Northern Ontario there. We're ending up with more cases in BC. Now, west of the Rockies, we're looking at the second tick, the western black-legged tick, which is spread up the west coast of the United States. Alberta, we don't think we're having any cases transmitted in Alberta. It seems that all the cases we're finding have been imported, at least to date. That's what seems to be the case. But like I said, these are the hot spots. I don't think it's reached PEI yet. Probably doesn't have the mice, right? You need the reservoir. But I could be wrong on that. Sometimes it's hard finding the data. I found this here. This was CTV. I couldn't find the author. I was going to email them and ask them where they were getting this data from, but there were some projections, which I thought were kind of interesting. This is their 2020 projection. This article was written in 2015 or 14, so they didn't quite get it right. But I'll show you some of their other projections. 2050, 2080. So who knows, right? They're basing this on climate change, right? And we're definitely seeing this kind of thing with climate change, where you're seeing these mice and the ticks, you got multiple species are actually migrating more northward, right? I was actually reading up on these ticks a while ago, and they're not the hardiest animals, right? If they freeze, they generally die. But it does seem that they're very good at hiding in those leaves in the fall, and we don't really know what they do. They're very small and very good at hiding, but we think they're hiding under leaves and things like that. So you have more opportunities with cooler and milder winters, and that's the case with a lot of insects, right? They find places to hide over the winters, and when you don't get that prolonged -40 anymore in some areas, the ticks are having a better chance at surviving. At the moment, like I said, we seem to be having some ticks, at least in southern Alberta, and many coming in imported on dogs and things like that. But we seem to think they're not actually being transmitted in Canada yet. So here's the numbers. I just looked these up the other day. We only started recording Lyme disease in 2009. This is I think, a real big failure. We've had Lyme disease in Canada since the 1980s. Let me show you a map. I'll go back to the map for a second. 1981, I think it was, Lyme disease appeared in Canada right here. There's an island right there. It's kind of one of the most southern tips of Canada. There was Lyme disease there, and then slowly it's been spreading more and more northward. But the cases do seem to be going up. I think we're going to see like all these stats, right? We're going to see little stars, 2020, 2021. All our data is messed up for those 2 years, right? With the pandemic stuff. So it went down, but I don't necessarily believe that. In terms of number of reported cases, there were probably a lot of people that didn't go in because of the pandemic, right? Alberta, here's some numbers. Not a ton, a few cases a year at the moment. Like I said, we think they're all imported. You can see this information here. There's tick submission programs. I think there's 3 places in town. So you can submit your tick to public health. I don't know how you do that. Some people submit their ticks to their veterinarians. And I think there's, I think I saw somewhere is it the Métis Council? I don't know why they're taking ticks. One of these, something non-health related seem to be taking ticks as well. So people submit these ticks, and And sometimes, in many cases, they're not the right tick, right? Because if you can find it, it's probably too big and it's not the right tick. But there have been a few cases where they found the tick and it has had the bacteria in it. So. Oh, I'm totally missing. I was going to show you the map, right? I was looking at the tick database and there's a map and there were 2 of the right tick found in Fort McMurray. And it even showed you whereabouts in Fort McMurray they were found, although that's where the person's address is. And it was actually near the Thickwood Sobeys, right? So somebody up there had 2 ticks on their dog. But anyway, and it was the right kind of tick. So there's a tick database. So, if you're concerned about these things, what are some things you can do? You can buy these tools. I saw one in Canadian Tire. It's a tick removal tool with a little magnifying glass on it. But if you're going in certain places in the States or Ottawa area, just think about, is it tick season and what you can do. They're always recommending you wear pants and you pull your socks over your pants, and that's how you're a real cool hiker. But the big thing you can do is, if you're concerned, just jump in the shower afterwards. These ticks, believe it or not, they take more than 24 hours to actually burrow themselves in. So if you take a shower after your hike, that will probably get rid of most of them. If they're on your clothes, put your clothes in the dryer or wash them. But these ticks take a long time to burrow themselves. They kind of have this whole thing. They actually inject an anesthetic in you so you don't feel it, and then they have they've got these little I don't know what you want to call them, these proboscis things, and they submit their saliva is sort of like a little bit of a solidifying glue or cement, and it's a very long process, and it takes time. So like I said, have a shower, wash your clothes, and that should get rid of most of them. The big thing, actually, the big deal, and probably many people who have dogs know this, it's a little hard to do that with your dog, right? And sometimes it's a big deal trying to inspect your dog for ticks, right? Because they have a lot of hair. Some dogs have way more hair than others, and some dogs are very big dogs. So you've got all that kind of thing going on. But dogs can get Lyme disease. It does happen. My friend is from Connecticut, where Lyme disease was actually discovered. And he used to have a dog that got ill from it. He was telling me a little bit about this a few years ago. Okay, so that's enough for Lyme disease for now. I could go on about it for quite some time. There's quite a bit of interesting things to say about it. Maybe the last footnote I'll say about it is that there was a vaccine developed for it. And I think you can get it for dogs and horses. I'm not sure. You can't get it for humans. So this was maybe in the 1990s. A company developed the vaccine. And I think there were some people with some side effects, right? They were, and it was just one of those economic decisions where they're like, whatever, we're not going there. We don't see there's a big demand for it. But now we're at the point where there's probably going to be a big demand for it. So I think it's kind of in new development where they take another look to see, because sometimes with these vaccine trials, you see some side effects, and sometimes that's a big deal, sometimes it's not. And I think they were, sometimes it's just it costs a lot of money, right? But now there's probably a good economic case to be made for a Lyme disease vaccine in some places, like Connecticut, right? The numbers in the States have just skyrocketed like you wouldn't believe. Okay, let's talk about mosquitoes. Everyone loves mosquitoes, hey? So 3,000 species of mosquitoes, about 300 will bite humans. Some of them will carry disease. So here's a stat I found somewhere. The number's actually going down, so that's good news. So maybe it's every minute now instead of 45 seconds. But mosquitoes are probably responsible for more human death than any other animal on the planet by far. There are quite a few different types of mosquito varieties. I'll talk about them in a minute. The big one in Canada is, of course, West Nile virus. I think we've had this, not this one, there's another one called Eastern equine encephalitis, has been transmitted in Canada once or twice in the past, but it's not a common thing. We also talked about malaria. There's a few others there, depending on if you've done some traveling or if you're from other countries, you might be familiar with yellow fever or dengue. They're really, really common infections. But I'm not going to get into those in any detail here today. And there's a whole bunch I don't know anything about. I was looking this up on the internet, and there's all these kind of really, they're local geographical things. I think this one's in Australia somewhere, and so on. So, like I said, lots of species of mosquitoes. You can see there's actually 3 genera here that are known to spread infectious disease. So the Aedes mosquitoes. These ones are really, really common. Sometimes they have all sorts of funny common names. I saw one, what was it called? I don't know, something like old boot mosquito or something like that. Tree stump mosquito. They've got lots of weird names. And these ones here tend to like stagnant water. So picture that old boot, right? That old rubber boot in the forest. It rains, it fills with water, and then it sort of evaporates and gets slimy and stagnant. That's these mosquitoes, right? So, and they spread way too many things, right? Dengue, yellow fever, Zika, and so on. Aedes aegypti is kind of one of the big ones, and I imagine that, I don't know if that's from Egypt or not, but some of these mosquitoes have been known to be found geographically, and then they kind of, probably with humans or global trade, they suddenly end up on a new continent. And so sometimes people are really concerned about these things. So Zika was one of the ones that was a big deal a few years ago. We're not hearing so much about it now, but it still is a big concern, particularly if you're pregnant, right? Anopheles, malaria, and then the Culex mosquitoes for West Nile fever. And these ones also tend to like stagnant water. And humans are good at that, right? We've got eaves troughs in our houses that sometimes get slimy water in. People like to leave buckets, and some places people litter, and there's cans, and there's all sorts of things there. Some of them like farms, right? So you can imagine hoof marks in the dirt and gets all water and stagnant and those kind of things. There was a huge outbreak of West Nile virus. I don't remember what year that was, 2007 or something in California. Somewhere around the time when there were all those house foreclosures. So that all these people that had to leave their house because of their mortgage failing or whatever was going on there with that financial crisis. And in California, there's a lot of swimming pools, right? And so people just leave their swimming pools, and then you had all these mosquito breeding places going on, and the numbers went up pretty high. So let's talk about West Nile virus, West Nile fever. Okay, this is a bird mosquito thing, right? This is the natural kind of way of things, and you can imagine from the name that it's come from overseas, not just Africa where the Nile is, but also parts of Asia and the Middle East, and kind of that sort of band of area. And it's been around for a long time and characterized for a long time. It wasn't really a big deal for people over there who had it. And same thing with the birds. The birds were not getting very sick either. So in 1999, somehow it got over here. There's some theories about how that worked. We're not entirely sure, but birds, they can fly far, some of them, right? So it's not hard to imagine this kind of thing happening, right? And so around 2000, like 99 is when the first cases were confirmed. Around 2000, humans were starting to get it, and birds were dying like crazy. I remember there was all sorts of stuff in the news. If you find a dead bird, report it, and there were crows dying and robins dying, but it can affect all sorts of birds. But now the native species around here have kind of adapted, and it's not so lethal to them anymore. You're not seeing massive amounts of dead crows like you were, this is 20 something years ago now. But it's a bird mosquito thing, right? So sometimes, so it turns out in hot, dry summers is when you see this the most. What happens when it's hot and dry? The birds are like, it's hot and dry, I'm out of here, right? Mosquitoes, they can't fly as far, and so they're just getting a little more desperate, and they're a little bit more likely to bite other things, such as humans, and horses are the big ones. Horses, it can be they can get very ill from West Nile fever, and so we're more of the accidental thing, and we can't usually spread it from human to human. Blood transfusions are kind of the exception, but if a human is infected with it, our viral load isn't high enough that if a mosquito bites you, they're not going to give it to someone else. The birds, on the other hand, the viruses are multiplied in very high numbers. So it's usually a dead end, but we can get sick. I wonder if I have a thing with the symptoms on here. No, I don't. I know it's in the notes. And in many cases, people are getting flu-like symptoms. So all the usual things, right? Fever, chills, aches, fatigue, right? That's kind of often what people are getting. And many people, it's mild, a mild flu kind of thing, right? It sucks for a couple of days, you sleep it off and you're done. In some cases, you'll see that we're calling it West Nile encephalitis. So in some cases, we're looking at brain swelling, right? And that can be a problem, right? If you are a child, it's not a big deal. Anyone know why it would not be a big deal if a child's brain is swelling? That's exactly it. Yeah, the bones aren't fused. So children tend to be a little more resilient to that. But if you are an adult, or particularly if you are elderly, you can die from this, right? So now that we know what West Nile looks like, and if you're in an area, so in Alberta, you're looking at the drier southern areas, Lethbridge and Medicine Hat, doctors there it's on their mind, right, in the summer months. And you've got an elderly patient in the summer months, because summer months, you don't usually get the flu, right? So they're thinking about it a bit more, and they'll often prescribe some sort of steroid to kind of reduce the inflammation. And so you don't see a lot of deaths anymore from it, but once in a while you do. If it doesn't get diagnosed, not everyone necessarily goes to the hospital. But that's West Nile, and I think actually there is a horse vaccine. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think there's a human vaccine. I feel like I read about that somewhere recently, but it's kind of the details are foggy. So where do we find West Nile? Those places, right? So there's two mosquitoes, the Culex mosquitoes. There's kind of an eastern version, and there's kind of a western version. So the eastern version is called like the house mosquito or something. I think it says here northern house mosquito. And so now you know how it survives the winters, right? It's finding some warm spots, kind of going sleepy and dormant, barns, garages, wherever, right? The western ones are more associated with agriculture. Like I said, they like to breed, and you've got that hoof mark, and you've got the mucky, stagnant water. They tend to like to breed in those things, but they're closely related. Both spread West Nile. You're looking at more possible transmission in drier places, and every summer when you have a hot, dry summer, the cases spike a little bit because of the they're not finding the bird host so easily. But it's kind of went away. I remember, in 2000, it was a big deal, right? It's kind of like, when Zika popped up or Ebola pops up, it's like, oh, we got something new over here and people are dying from it. And, this is kind of an interesting case where we've come to an equilibrium with it, where the birds aren't dying anymore, the humans aren't dying anymore. And this is kind of an ideal situation. So what about Zika, right? Are we going to get Zika up here? Probably not. We have winters, which helps us to get rid of certain species. And these mosquitoes tend to be a lot more sensitive to the cold. I think there's all sorts of places that have mosquito traps. And I was reading about one place somewhere near Toronto, and they were able to catch a couple of these. So sometimes these mosquitoes, in the summer, I don't know whether they're catching rides on birds or whether they're just kind of migrating a little bit more north over the summer, but they're not breeding in Canada, at least that we can tell anyway. Once in a while we catch one, not a big concern. And not every mosquito is going to have the illness. There is some indication that it might be actually transmitting in some of the warmer places in the US, and people are keeping an eye on this, right? And a lot of Zika, malaria, West Nile, a big thing people can do is mosquito control, right? I know when West Nile came up, right? So this is 20 something years ago. Mosquito control was all over the news everywhere. And near my parents' house, there's a beautiful swamp. They filled in with gravel. It was so sad. But that was one of the things they were doing. They're thinking about mosquito control, and they're thinking of West Nile, even though that wasn't even an issue in that part of the country at the time. But the town figured they could do something about it. That was cheap. It's kind of ironic though. Like if you know how many mosquitoes there are in Northern Ontario where I grew up, like filling in one swamp, like, I don't know, not really a big deal. But they have all sorts of mosquito control in Winnipeg. It's kind of worth looking that one up once in a while. Those Manitoba mosquitoes are legendary. Anyone from Manitoba? Yeah, I camped there one summer, and I just remember spending the entire time in my tent for that night because of those mosquitoes. Okay, so let's shift gears now, and I want to talk a little bit about nosocomial infections. So nosocomial means hospital or healthcare acquired. I don't know why there's a special word for that, but I guess that's the English language. We like to invent new words all the time. It used to be we saw hospital acquired all the time, but we kind of changed the acronym to healthcare associated because, of course, hospitals are just one branch of all sorts of clinics and nursing homes and all sorts of things you can imagine that fall under that umbrella of healthcare. So these are a big deal. And depending on where your careers bring you, this is going to be even a bigger deal. You can see this kind of number here. This number of 10% has been kicking around for decades. So that number is basically says that about 10% of patients that spend a significant amount of time in a hospital are likely to get secondary infections. And the longer you stay, the more likely it is. Now, the numbers vary, right? You can see 5 to 15%. Some hospitals are very good at it, and some of them we don't know why. This is something we're starting to think about in kind of the modern era, is just even just design of hospitals, right? If you can imagine if you have certain people with certain illnesses and they're near, let's say, the intensive care wing, that's just a recipe for transmitting illness to people who are already ill, right? So and air and ventilation and those kind of things can make a big deal. We're starting to slowly get better at it. We just don't build hospitals every day, right? But we're getting better at this kind of thing. This number skyrockets as the hospital fills up. So as a hospital hits about 50 to 70% capacity, these numbers spike massively because, of course, you just have so much traffic going through there, and a lot more sick people and a lot more germs, of course, right? Okay, so let's just talk about why this is the case. It's probably pretty obvious, but kind of 4 big reasons, right? Number 1 is, well, this is a hospital. This is where the pathogens are, right? The sick people are bringing them to the hospital, right? Some of them could be superbugs, so this is not good, right? Number 2, you've got the traffic, right? So you have all sorts of healthcare people and employees that are going from person to person, and they are potential vectors. Could be on the clothing, on their hands, cell phones, you name it. And so that's a big deal. Medical equipment, all of those things are potential vectors. A lot of these people have compromised immune systems, right? They could be elderly, they could be sick already. They could have some sort of infection that is, why are they in the hospital? Like, it means they're in a certain, usually it means you're sick enough that you're there, right? You're not at home sleeping it off. You're there, and that means your immune system is working extra hard to deal with whatever it is you have. And many of these people are elderly or otherwise, right? The last one is just some of the procedures, right? Catheters are a big deal, right? Hospitals all the time. And that's a bladder infection just waiting to happen. It really is, right? And that's a big one. But other invasive procedures, surgeries, all those kind of things are potential opportunities for pathogens to get introduced to somebody's tissues, right? So what else can we say about these? I've seen different pie charts. The numbers vary with every different study, but it's always the same things on the list. What kind of infections are we talking about? So skin infections, urinary tract infections are often the big ones. Like I said, catheters, right? A huge percentage of people in hospitals are getting catheters, and very easy to introduce urinary tract infections that way. Skin infections as well. Often people are getting surgery or or whatever, right? Or they're going in to get their stitches dealt with, and that's a potential opportunity. Surgical site infections, bloodstream infections, respiratory tract infections, they're all kind of on the list. And who are the culprits? Some of the organisms that we've been talking about, right? Number one culprit in many places is Staphylococcus, right? Staphylococcus aureus. And of course, like a quarter of them might be drug resistant. So big deal. And it's just very good at, I think I mentioned this last time, very good at infecting pretty much any tissue. It can infect your lungs, your blood, your skin, your brain, you name it, right? If it gets there, it's going to cause you some problems. E. coli is a big one for urinary tract infections. And we'll talk a little bit about pathogenic E. coli. Next topic, we'll talk a lot more about pathogenic E. coli. And I keep mentioning Pseudomonas. In some hospitals, Pseudomonas is number one. It sort of ranges from 5 to like 75% of these infections. In some hospitals, it's just rampant and very good at, kind of like staph, it's very good at infecting multiple tissues. You know, you can get ear infections, you get blood infections. Pseudomonas is pretty good at that. And we'll talk a little bit about Pseudomonas in topic 14 in a bit more detail. Some other usual suspects, right? Candida, that's yeast. In this case, we're not talking about the yeast that causes thrush or vaginal yeast infections, although sometimes it can cause blood infections. But that other one that I mentioned, Candida auris, we talked about that when we talked about the fungi. I kind of said it was sort of the new kid on the block. We've only known about it for about 10 years. And it's very good at causing blood infections. And in some cases, it's drug resistant, which is kind of a big deal. Staphylococcus, epidermidis, some cases. I'm surprised Streptococcus is not on this list. I just copied this from the textbook, but Streptococcus pyogenes, sometimes the one that causes strep throat, is good at causing blood infections as well. And then Clostridium in some hospitals, this is number one. Okay, so I always find this interesting because it's been around. We've known about it for like 100 years, but up until about 15 years ago, it just wasn't on any of these lists. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on with that and why it has kind of reemerged as kind of a big deal, a player on this list. So how do we control these things? This is a big deal, right? Like I said, kind of getting people to wash their hands and getting compliance. Hand washing compliance is maybe one of the most difficult things on the entire planet. You tell people to wash their hands and then watch and see what happens, right? Some people are in there, they roll their sleeves up, they're scrubbing, they're getting them under their nails, and they're, going a whole 45 seconds to 2 minutes. Other people, it's like, did you even use soap? Right? Did the water hit your hand, or did it just kind of just, some people have seen that, right? They're just kind of like, shoot, and then they dry off, right? This is a big deal, right? Getting compliance, and we're getting better. I think I've mentioned as well in healthcare settings with regulations, things like people signing off, people having a witness, particularly with things like surgery, obviously, that's a big deal. But having those kind of things, everything else, hopefully it's kind of obvious, right? Keeping things clean. So good housekeeping. You had a patient in there with MRSA. When they're done in that room, it gets disinfected thoroughly. Medical devices as well, trying to make sure they are clean and disinfected as well in many cases. Statistics and monitoring of outbreaks, right? So what is going on? What is being spread? Is it MRSA? Is it C. diff? There's going to be different procedures for that, right? Clostridium is an endospore forming organism. So if that's kind of a big deal, then you're going to find a disinfectant such as a peroxide that is going to kill endospores, right? So that's kind of, part of it. And, if there's some hospital that is kind of being flagged for all these outbreaks, maybe that means Alberta Health comes in and sees what their policies are and needs to make some changes. Like I said, unfortunately, sometimes it's not the hospital's fault. It's an old building that's designed poorly. Maybe it's just not adequate for the number of people in there, and that can be a big deal, right? Sometimes we cause problems on our own. People may remember at the beginning of the COVID outbreak, Italy, right? What was going on in Italy? That was kind of scary. Lots of things, right? There's old people there, lots of old people. Italy is a very old population. And Italians tend to be touchy-feely. They like to play cards at the bar. So you got all those potential for spreading. But something they've been doing in Italy for the last 20 years is they've been closing down all the small hospitals and building these big ones because it's more economical. It's just not necessarily the best idea when you've got a pandemic where you've got them loaded with sick people, right? And so that was causing problems. And so eventually they were realizing, okay, all the COVID patients we're going to kind of keep to these floors, and you saw that by the time the pandemic is reaching parts of Canada, like our hospital has certain floors dedicated to COVID patients, for example, right? And keeping them separate. Yeah, I think I mentioned a bunch of these things. This was from the textbook. I don't know if there's anything, here. I mean, some other things, gloves and gowns, all those kind of things to keep things, sterile or disinfected, or, you're keeping things separate, right? And, even making visitors gown up in some cases, right? Okay, so the last part of this topic, I want to talk a little bit about emerging diseases or re-emerging diseases, because this is what the public thinks about a lot, because these are the things that hit the headlines. But these are things that microbiologists think about all the time because, they're new things, and, we're always hoping to predict the future and how we can prevent these kind of things from happening. And there's certain diseases in here that are kind of worth talking about, right? So what is causing these things to emerge, right? So increasing population densities, right? So anytime you see population densities increase, you're looking at more diseases. New strains. So we've seen some of these things over the last few years, right? So the H1N1 in 2009, that was a new strain. This new coronavirus 2, this is a new strain. It turned out that both of them were really highly infectious. So this is kind of a big deal, right? There are other strains we'll talk about, avian flu here in a minute. There were some significant outbreaks a few years ago that were making a lot of people sick, and there's a few different avian flus that have popped up over the years, and we'll get to that in a minute. I think I've got that on a very soon slide or two. So what happened in 2009, right? So we're talking about this. Remember, there's antigenic drift. That's the slow mutations. And then you have the shift, which is like really fast, okay? So in 2009, it was actually a quadruple reassortment. So we had probably happened in a pig somewhere. Some pig was infected by 4 different viruses, or maybe it was like one pig was infected by 2, another by 2, and then somehow those 2 got together, and we're not sure. It happened previous to 2009. They think maybe about 18 months before that. And you had that reassortment, so the genetic shift. And then we end up with a new virus that was able to infect humans and pigs actually very readily, right? So that's kind of what happened in 2009. I think I had to have a better slide on that. I was going to show you, I had a genetic analysis slide that showed you the 4 species. So we had a human flu strain was part of that new one. We had a bird strain that was part of that new one, and 2 different pig strains were part of this virus. And like I said, suddenly you had something that was highly infectious and able to infect a lot of people. So what about avian flu? Right, it's looking for the cutest bird picture I could find. So avian flu usually means you got it from a bird. So I think I mentioned before that the influenza virus, it affects humans in the respiratory tract, but birds, it's gastrointestinal, right? So this is the receptors found in that part of the tissues. So usually people with avian flu are exposed to birds in some form or another, right? So it might mean you're a farmer, and in a lot of Asian countries, people are, and people sell birds on the market. And so you've got some ducks or some chickens, and you're exposed to their fecal matter constantly. I grew up, my dad had chickens and ducks, and they are messy animals. I'll just say that. So easy to get exposed to them. I was reading about this one practice that was done in, I can't remember which food market. I think it was in China. And they were talking about, you've got this row of chickens, and sometimes like chickens, there's a rock, they'll try to eat it, right? Like they're not very intelligent animals. You know, they just like, oh, whatever, it looks like food, I'll eat it. So they choke on things and they can die. So what happens when you have a dead chicken? You can't sell it anymore, right? So there's enough of these. It's a pretty common practice that they kind of give, like, I don't know what you want to call it, chicken rescue breathing, but it's kind of like they just stick your mouth on the chicken's beak and suck, right? And you save the chicken's life. So now you can sell it. Not a good idea when bird flu is going around. But like I said, you don't have to do that kind of thing. You could just be exposed to the feces. And so you can see here's a guy here who's getting the feces in the eyes, nose, or mouth, and is going to get sick. You're not looking at very much human-to-human transmission, very, very rare. We're, of course, very concerned about any genetic mixing, some antigenic shift going on, because that would be a worst-case scenario, is having a highly pathogenic bird flu that suddenly became human-to-human transmission. And we're looking at, that's kind of a worst-case scenario. This is the kind of thing that, you know, with pandemics, people have been talking about for decades as a worst-case scenario, by far. There's the bird flu in the dust, so the person's getting sick, and we're looking at something that is that has a high mortality rate. I'll show you some numbers here in a second. I couldn't find any more recent numbers, but this is looking at the 03 to 013 outbreak and the number of cases in different parts of Asia and the Middle East. And there are actually a number of cases in, I think, Eastern Europe as well. So take a look at that number there, right? 60% mortality. Thankfully, this seems to be mostly bird to human transmission. I think something like maybe 4 of those cases were suspected to be maybe human to human. They're not really sure because it's hard to tell who's been exposed to birds. But, you know, until we kill all the birds on the planet, this is never, ever going to go away. So this summer I went to a zoo and they had some ostriches, and the ostriches were all locked up, and there was concerns about bird flu had been found in birds in Canada. I don't think there were any human cases, but a lot of zoos were doing this, and I wasn't able to see the ostriches because it said, you know, they're being quarantined just in case they don't want to have any bird flu transmission and kill their valuable birds, I guess. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah, it was in the news this summer for sure. The actual mortality is probably not 60%. It's probably much lower because you get a lot of sick people that don't go to the hospital, right? So it's still probably 10% or more, which is a really big deal. People getting very sick. So this is what we're thinking about all the time. When these things hit in the news, what do you do, right? They kill all the birds. I was reading about where was it? Was it South Korea? The one year there was more than 1 million chickens were killed in a week. I don't even know what you do with that many dead birds. Probably bury them and try to compost them. But here's a bunch of eggs being dumped out. This is where was this one here? Was this doesn't say, does it? So this one was a few years ago. But they're suiting up. They're concerned about the bird flu, so they're putting on all their, you know, N95 masks and those kind of things to and then just dealing with the birds, unfortunately.
Wearing the goggles on
Yeah, you can't sell them, right? If there's a bird flu outbreak in your country, often that means all the poultry is suddenly useless, right? Unfortunately. Whether those birds have it or not. The other thing I was going to say, right? I think I just alluded to this a minute ago, is it can be found in the wild birds, so it's never going away. And you see a lot of the other big concern is with animal practices. It's very common for people on a farm to have ducks and pigs, let's say, and that's kind of a recipe for these flu viruses to mix and mingle. You're starting to see in Canada, in larger farms, these, you know, whatever you think about mass farming, pig farms are actually in Canada, like the large ones, it's kind of weird. Like they're very, like the people are wearing these kind of things to see the pigs. They don't want to get the pigs sick, and they don't want the pigs to get them sick. And you're seeing kind of this sterile kind of farming in some places, which is, I don't know if that's the way of the future or not. Don't know if it's farming, but the big concern is, of course, the flu. We talked about coronaviruses already as a new strain. There's the 4 common cold coronaviruses that were known of before the year 2000. And since then, it's been about 1 coronavirus a decade, right? So that gives us another 10 years, right? So we have SARS-1, I'll get you in a second, SARS Classic, that was 2002. This was highly pathogenic and burnt itself out really quickly. We're still seeing cases of MERS here and there. This is Middle East, and it seems to be transmitted through camels. And then, of course, we got this new thing, and we don't really know what the host was. Doesn't really matter. It's with us now, probably for good, right? Question?
Yes, I'm wondering for the avian flu, do they have like medicine for it?
Well, it's like any flu. You can make a vaccine, but once you know the strain, 6 months to make the vaccine.
Well, and then the
Right.
strains.
Yeah, so there are people kind of working on trying to make universal flu vaccines, and they've been able to do it in mice.
Mhm.
So maybe, who knows? Maybe a decade from now, we'll somehow figure out how to do it in humans. And you can do it in llamas too. Right?
How do these birds get the thing from when they're eating around?
Sure. Birds, yeah, I wouldn't, chickens, I'm sure.
Just gotta-
Yeah. Some birds are very, very messy, right? And they get like, if you've ever seen a chicken coop, like it's kind of everywhere. It's on their feathers, it's, and they flap around and they, it gets air in the air and it's very easy for them to breathe it in. Yeah, get on their food. Some birds are just a lot cleaner than others. Ducks are much more cleaner than chickens. That's my experience from having them a long time ago. I think I mentioned, we were talking about it may have been a pangolin. I think not everyone agrees with that, but the pangolin was cute, so I had to show you the picture. What else are we thinking about with emergence of new strains? Overuse, abuse of antibiotics, right? That's a big one. And we're very concerned about superbugs, of course. And the #1 superbug is Staphylococcus, MRSA. And we talked a lot about this one already. And the big deal is the healthcare settings, but you don't have to get it from healthcare settings. Sometimes I don't really know why we distinguish between healthcare acquired Staphylococcus and community acquired. I don't know if it really matters where you got it from. If it's resistant to drugs, it doesn't. It's a big deal for that infection. This is from the textbook, kind of just showing an isolation room, and it kind of discusses a little bit about the gowning and the disinfecting and those kind of things. I'm trying to remember, this is not from our hospital, but I remember being there years ago and walking by a room that said something about this patient being isolated. It never said it was MRSA, but I suspected that was the case. C. diff is another one. Sometimes you see the abbreviation as CDI, Clostridium difficile infection. We talked about this one as well as a spore-forming organism. Trying to remember what the numbers were. I think about 15% of people have it in them already. And if you're young, I think you're more likely to be colonized. I can't remember if that's the trend or not, but also very easily spread in a hospital. The endospores are very resilient and they stick around. And so if they're not killed, they can easily infect new people. So this one here, I think we're calling it antibiotic induced or antibiotic associated diarrhea, right? So I think I've got a little cartoon that kind of shows you what's going on with C. diff. Let me see if that's on the next slide. Oh, I know I have a C. diff cartoon somewhere. Maybe that's on my next set of notes. Generally the trend is somebody takes antibiotics for some other reason. Often it's a broad spectrum antibiotic that is just wiping out your normal flora, and the endospores survive. It thrives. It secretes some toxins. They're enterotoxins. So we'll talk about toxins a bit more again next unit. I know it's been a while, but entero means the gut, right? And the toxins cause diarrhea and a watery diarrhea. It's very hard to treat. And sometimes, we have to do drastic measures to get rid of it. So more on that in the next unit, but that's one of the superbugs we're concerned about. Changes in weather patterns, right? So Lyme disease, 1975 was not a thing in Canada. In 1980, suddenly we had a couple of cases. Now we're looking at a couple thousand cases and probably more. I was able to find 2 studies on Lyme disease, and both of them were estimating that we're probably only detecting anywhere from a quarter to 1/2 of the actual cases that are in Canada. So that's something else to think about. Modern transportation, right? There's a lot of theories behind West Nile that it had to do with one certain flight. So I don't know exactly how they tracked it down to one flight going from, I think it was Israel or somewhere in that neck of the woods, maybe it was Lebanon, to New York City, right? So I don't know how they isolated to one flight, but right, the virus was there apparently. The first SARS, right? We know exactly what flight the guy from Hong Kong to Toronto got on, and because we know the illness. And this one we were all tracking, again, also tracking the spread across the globe. And of course, with SARS-2, there's lots of tracking as it was watching cases pop up in different parts of the world. And, all those discussions about, do we just, ground all the planes and those kind of things were going on back at the time, of course. Here's a map of West Nile from, I think this is from this is from our textbook. You can see 1999, New York City. And they watch the spread. And by 2005, it was all across the continent. So there it is. What other things, right? All sorts of ecological wartime things. These all really mess up, what we have going for us. You can see, for example, if you look back at some of these disasters, Hurricane Katrina, the amount of illnesses that ended up in New Orleans, that earthquake in Haiti. What year was that? That was probably 10 years ago now. Haiti had not had a cholera outbreak in something like 75 years, and then they had that earthquake right at the time when someone decided to bring cholera to Haiti, and there was a massive outbreak. I think it was something like 200,000 people were sick over that, and a big deal. War, right? I can only imagine what's going on right now in Ukraine with people not having access to medicine and all sorts of other public health services and things like that. All right, anyone know what that is?
Probably the travel of disease or something.
Yeah, those are all the flights on the planet, right? Somebody made a little global map. So this is the thing, right? These germs don't care, right? Going to Paris, great. Why not? Hey, bring your germ there, wherever. This was a map. This was made a few years ago now, but kind of showing the all sorts of emerging diseases and outbreaks that had occurred or in the process of occurring that were being monitored by this particular group. So we're not going to stop hearing about these things, right? Like I said, another 10 years from now, we might hear about another coronavirus if the pattern is the same. There's going to be something else. This is just kind of a part of being human. Some things are going to be a big deal. Some things are not, right? I mean, Ebola, there's lots of talk about that, but there was not a single case in Canada. So, if you're living in Canada, it wasn't necessarily a big deal. If you had families overseas, it was a big deal. I have a friend that he was born in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and he was actually trying to go home at the time and was not allowed in the country because of the Ebola outbreak, right? So these are gonna impact all of us at some point. Some other things to think about. If you ever do some traveling, you may need to get vaccinated for some things or another. I saw this, I underlined this because I thought this was interesting, right? When do you get your rabies vaccine? If you are anticipating contact with carnivorous animals, I don't know who fits this category. How many people are actively, searching out carnivores when they're on their trips? But I thought that was interesting. Yellow fever is a big one. If you travel to certain countries, when you get off the plane, they want to see your passport and they want to see your yellow fever vaccination document, right? So I had that one for doing some traveling years ago, and probably many of you have, depending on what country you're from. So this is a big deal too in some countries, right? Yellow fever. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but maybe another time. Question? Yeah. Maybe. Good call. Yeah, yeah. It's true. Yeah, some countries have a lot of feral dogs, and that's a big deal. Yeah, yeah. So I know when I did some traveling years ago, I went to an actual travel clinic, and they actually had these maps on the wall, and with like which ones to get where you were going, and it was really fascinating actually, kind of looking at those kind of things. Typhoid fever, same thing. If you're expected to go to a certain area, hepatitis A is a big one. Hepatitis A, where you're going anywhere where water sanitation may not be as good, it's usually recommended. You're not going to die from hepatitis A, but if you can get the shot, better than having some unpleasant hepatitis.
For extra like travel vaccinations too.
For which?
Sometimes you have to pay for extra travel vaccinations.
Some of them, yeah.
Or just get
Yeah.
your doctor to go through where you are going and give them to you.
Yeah, yeah. It depends on what it is. Yeah. Like when so I had hepatitis A in about probably like 20 years ago. And then I'm trying to remember what year it was I went to Mexico. And I have a friend who's a doctor, and he was like, yeah, you'll probably have to pay for this one. But turns out my drug plan here paid for it. And then he did it for me for free. Right. So I think that was one where you might have to pay for it.
Which would probably be some diseases that people are willing to pay for stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, who knows what the cost is? Like some of these things, like, I mean, the COVID vaccine shots, like, I'm not sure what they cost, but I bet you it's not $1 a pop, right? And at some point, right, that might be, like, I know there's discussions in the States because the Americans have now declared it to be a non-pandemic. And so I think the government is trying to stop paying for it, for the vaccine, right? So yeah, so what the consequences going to be, right? Everyone who can afford it is going to get it, or who has a health plan. And then it's going to be like, like half of these diseases where you got the poorer people are being affected, and it's just like, what are we doing, right? So a couple other things to say about this epidemiology and all that is there's massive amounts of record keeping. So in Alberta, it's Alberta Health, keeps track of all sorts of things. And they, of course, report to Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada. The CDC in the States and the World Health Organization, they keep stats worldwide as well. And all of these are important for kind of tracking and monitoring outbreaks and things like that. So one thing to know is that there's kind of a list of diseases that fall under the category as notifiable. That means there's a law that says if somebody has polio, we need a record of it, for example, right? This is what happened with Lyme disease. Before 2009, it was not a notifiable disease. So we had like 20 years of Lyme disease and they weren't keeping any records. After 2009, now it's a reportable disease. So there's a huge list of these. Here's a few, and you can see they fall into different categories. Sexually transmitted diseases are one that usually there's going to be, if they detect an outbreak, there's usually a response of contact tracing and trying to identify vulnerable populations, those kind of things. Disease prevented by routine vaccination. Again, if there's outbreaks in schools and things like that, they can be concerned depending on what it is. Food and waterborne. Hopefully that's an obvious one. We can prevent a lot of people from getting sick if we can figure out which food is the cause. Is it the onions? Is it the romaine lettuce? Is it the ground beef? Take that out of the grocery stores, and you can do a lot of public health good. Bioterrorism agents, that was an obvious one. We want to know about those for sure. I'll show you some numbers. I was able to find some numbers. I found some more recent numbers for Alberta, but not Canada. I just probably need to do a bit more digging. And the other thing is I'm really skeptical of any of the numbers from 2020 anyway, because that's the most recent numbers, because those numbers, we don't really know, with a lot of people not reporting things are going in. But you can see some of the numbers here for vaccination diseases, gonorrhea, chlamydia, waterborne diseases, and all of these numbers are available. You can find them through Alberta Health and Health Canada and those kind of things. A couple other things for today, and I think we'll not really enough time to do anything else, but some last thoughts, okay? Average adult brings fingers to nose, mouth, or eyes about 16 times per hour. Right? So now you're sitting there, next time you're in class, you're gonna be sitting there with your hand like this. You're like, I'm not touching my face today. I'm not touching my face. I remember working with a colleague. There we go. I just scratched my nose. And he was talking about this. And he says, you know what I realized today? I touch my face a lot. And I was watching the next couple of days, you could just see he was doing this and then, because he was worried. There must have been something going around at the same time, right? But, what else? Most respiratory viruses can survive a maximum of 2 to 4 days, depending on the temperature, surface materials, and the pathogen. Yeah, kind of sucks, right? And so some of these viruses are really fragile. The coronaviruses, the influenza viruses, are actually very fragile, but they often accompany mucus, right? So mucus kind of keeps them moist and allows them to survive a little longer. Like just by itself, the influenza virus, I think it has like an hour or two. But if it's on like, a $20 bill with a little moisture and mucus, it can last up to 4 or 5 days, right? So suddenly everyone's only using digital money, right? Yeah. What else? A handshake, right? More bacteria than a fist bump, right? So if you see me in the hallway and you want to show me that you're learning something, give me a fist bump, okay? Yeah, and then hand washing. Okay. So guess that's all for today. Don't forget what's going on Wednesday. Don't forget, please be on time. Please fill out your answer sheet properly. I'd love that.